I feel like my computer, it's got 18% power left. This time of the year, I feel like I have about 15% power left. Speaking of which, 2 more classes, and then the year is over, and you can all go and renew, muck about, whatever, and then we'll be back in the fall again. But we are going to finish Han Shan this semester, so in 3 classes. Okay, so let's go into tonight's text. He's really, in these last sections, we looked a little bit ahead, giving some very pragmatic, good advice on cultivation. So tonight we're going to start with, above all, So in his instructions now, as he's closing his essay, he says, above all, don't let your mind run wild, chasing externals or chasing after externals. If you permit or allow this to happen, it will only generate endless dream thinking type experiences. These experiences that you have are just phantoms of consciousness, and don't regard them as anything special. Basically, in the pure mind, there is not one thing. But as soon as the mind stirs, it departs from this, we would call the ground or the source of Dharma. In different ways, you could say it departs from the Buddha nature, departs from the essential nature, departs from the mind of the ground, Shindi, the basic foundational being that all people have. We put a footnote in here because this one line, basically in the pure mind, there's not one thing. Those of you who remember the Six Patriarch Sutra, there is this verse that he has that the then Hui Nung, who's not yet the patriarch and who's illiterate, nonetheless puts a verse on, following a verse that was put by, in this sutra, sort of his protagonist, if you want to use that language. Shen Shou, and Shen Shou's verse is a 4-line verse about the mind is like a tree, a Bodhi tree. The body's like a Bodhi tree. The mind is a bright mirror stand. Time and again, brush it clean, let no dust alight. And then Hui Nung answers with his verse, and he has to have a young boy write it for him because he can't write. And his verse, I don't know if you can see the footnote. Yeah, there you go. Translated, basically, awakening has no tree, nor any mirror stand bright. Originally, there's not one thing, Ban Lai Wei Wu. That's the line, where could dust alight? And it matches the above line here by Han Shan. Basically, in the pure mind, there's not one thing. Okay? Maybe to say a little bit about that, I have many students wherever this comes up, invariably somebody raises their hand and says, I just have if they're being polite, they'll say a heck of a hard time. I just have a devil of a time wrapping my mind around that. And I said, what is it that you have a hard time wrapping your mind around? That basically there's not one thing, or in the mind there's not one thing, and that sounds just awfully despairing and depressing. And at its face, if you don't take it in the context of this whole teaching, and it's particularly the idea that all beings have the Buddha nature whole and complete, you can easily then, from what may call the ordinary mind, the unawakened mind, see this as a statement of nothingness or negativity or denial. So if we look at this a little bit, it actually can have it has manifold meanings, but I'll just do 2 that I can kind of wrap my mind around. One meaning is basically there's not one thing, is a statement about the nature of reality. And I would say not just from a, quote, Buddhist perspective, but even from, if you want, a scientific perspective. And that's pointing to that all phenomena are conditioned. All phenomena are in flux and change and only exist in relationship to other phenomena, but don't exist in and of themselves independently or self-exist. So you could say it's just pointing to that all phenomena, mental, physical, material, are, and we use what's called 3 marks from the Buddhist perspective. They're impermanent, insubstantial, and unfulfilling. Okay, so impermanent, unsubstantial, and unfulfilling. And this is, impermanent is anicca. Insubstantial is what? Huh? Insubstantial means, yeah, anatta. It's another way of translating. We always translate as not self, but it means not self-existing, lacking a fundamental substance. It doesn't mean they don't exist. They do exist, but they exist only as passing phenomena. And then unfulfilling is a new translation for dukkha. I like, it's unfulfilling. It doesn't mean, oh, it's suffering. It just means it can't fulfill. It can't really deeply satisfy. And so there's this anxious feeling we have, facing reality of, we know things are passing and impermanent. We know that fundamentally they're insubstantial. And we are in a general state of, maybe Thoreau says, of quiet desperation, of despair, of the unfulfillingness of that state. So that's something that is not particularly radical, but from the point of view of basically there's not one thing, it's meant to be sort of like this antidote, this cold water to splash in the face to wake you up from what the text would say is false thinking or misguided thinking, where you think things are basically permanent and lasting, and that things are basically substantial, and you will find fulfillment. Now, maybe it's just a little elusive now, but it's just right around the corner with the next purchase, the next job, the next relationship, the next spa club membership, the next vacation, whatever. That sense. And what the Buddha is saying, a lot of the difficulty we have is that we don't face things squarely, but we get into thinking things are the way they aren't, and then invariably it gets harder and harder as life goes on, because after a certain amount of time you start to realize that this paradigm is not working. No matter how hard I try and no matter what I do, things don't seem to get any more lasting. They don't get any more substantial. And fulfillment is starting to, I think that's a lot of reason why I see people in their 60s and 70s, when they quote retire, go into this frantic overdrive, because then they got to get all the fulfillment now. They put it off, they waited. I've spent the best years of my life building up my equity and my retirement, and now I'm going to get it. And so they go on these cruises, they expand their house, they do all this stuff, frantically searching for fulfillment in those twilight years. And it's actually sad. I have friends that do this, and when they had kids, they had a small house. When the kids all go, the house actually fits it, but now they expand the house. They rip out the kitchen, they add these guest rooms, and guests never come because they're always traveling, going and trying to accumulate and gather fulfillment. And what Han Shan is talking about here is, not only do you want to let this behind in terms of just your worldly orientation, but don't bring this to your meditation practice. Do not bring this mind to your meditation practice, because now what will happen is you'll be looking for this kind of substantiality, confirming the self with your meditation. He says basically that's where all these states come from. So the states that he's going to go into now, which he calls the phantoms of consciousness, these are generated by using the same mind that doesn't face concrete reality, now is not facing the spiritual either. And so we come in almost as if this were the place that we're going to get all those nice things that we wanted for ourselves through meditation and release from suffering and nirvana. And nirvana will be mine, mine, all mine, and really enjoyable. And so what he's saying is, what you're doing in meditation, I won't say it's reducing the ego, because that sounds like a diet. But you're not, while you're meditating, you're not actively feeding it and reinforcing it. Let's just say that. So if the meditation is done correctly, the meditation practice, what you're doing is you're quieting the inputs that go to feeding the sense of self and what belongs to self. And the very quieting of that gives a space for what is he's going to call true self to manifest, and he uses that as an expedient. He says, don't think that this is just another reification of yourself that we call true. It's the true mind, which is nowhere attached, grasping on nothing. So it goes to the second meaning here. Basically, there's not one thing. The sixth patriarch and others mean it here is that basically you have everything you need whole and complete. So on one side it's saying things are insubstantial and blah, blah, blah. On the other side it's saying, he says, how unexpected. It's whole, it's complete, it's lacking nothing. It's always been there, it's unborn, undying. He's describing, therefore, there's nothing to add and nothing to get. So basically there's not one thing, works on both of these dimensions. It's not just kind of deconstructing a false reality or a false projection we have of reality, because that in itself would just be a kind of emptying of anything, meaning, and purpose. But he's saying, and when you do that, paradoxically, the fullness of yourself now can come, because you're no longer grasping and seeking and trying to add, because it's already whole and complete. So you see this way of looking at this line. It's a very simple line, but it has both those meanings. So if we go on, I was just thinking, maybe I'll use a poem tonight to illustrate this too. But let's go on with the text. Cultivators of today often do not recognize that they're deluded thoughts. Now, those of you who are following this, I can't point to it. I always forget to bring my laser. Anybody have a laser? Implanted or otherwise? Okay, this really is good on my yogic back. Wang, can you see Wang? So if we go nowadays, do effort man, am I reading it right? Always not know, own mind, follow? Next character at the end, that's Wang, false. And then the next character is thinking. So we translate that literally means false, but what is false thinking? It's one of those expressions we've been using for years. And when you try to translate it as something, so you can use deluded thinking, you can use misperception as another way of coming at what it's talking about. Misseeing, not seeing things accurately. So hence deluded. Filtered through. Thinking, and thinking here means thoughts, feelings, emotions, impulses, ideas, memories, all of those activities of mind that are filtered through the prism of self, and so forth get deflected and present not a transparent look at reality, but a refracted. So it's a kind of orientation of the mind that is not seeing things clearly, and therefore what comes in gets refracted into different things that seem to be there, but they're not an accurate, thus, sort of what is, but they're actually distortions. So it's a kind of distortion that comes with a orientation of mind that is confused, and particularly the texts say about self, about this idea of self. And therefore, once the idea of the self is set up, this becomes the lens through which we both project out and we receive in. And we get then this distorted image, which we call the Wang Xiang. So it means not only what's going out is distorted, but what's coming in is also distorted. And this is what's being talked about. So he says, cultivators of today do not recognize that this deluded mental, physical, total activity is just false and empty, and they mistake them as real. So in the lens of the self, then the way it's set up is we construct and set up things to reinforce this imaginary narrative we got going about me and mine. And not only that, but we take these things then to be real. We take them to be substantial and permanent and fulfilling. because we're setting them up in that play, like a drama. And because they mistake them for like real, they start to play with these. Now, he's talking obviously about the meditation states that come in. But you could project this out and say, this is what we're doing 24/7. Even when we're not meditating, we're taking the sensory input that's coming to us, we're filtering, refracting it into a little narrative through our home video thing, and we think this is real. It's real. Yours isn't real, but mine is. That's how we feel. You're a little deluded, you're a little, megalomania, ideas of grandeur, but me, rock solid. All my plans, the way I see things, right on. This is how politicians get elected, by the way. They figure out what you believe and they tell you they will give you that. And you like that because it already confirms, and therefore you vote for them. But here he's saying, when you do this activity, and that means in your meditation you're looking for certain states, and you're trying to avoid other states, and you have a preconception of what the awakened state is, and what nirvana feels like, right? And then he says, by doing this, you're just wasting your efforts. You're trying to cook sand and get rice. You'll never get rice this way. And he says, what is this like? Here we have, like shadow boxing. Anybody know shadow boxing? What shadow boxing is? Well, that's good. You're all pacifist, and so you wouldn't know what shadow boxing is. Shadow boxing is sometimes boxers or fighters, martial arts, who are training will put a light behind them, and they'll face a wall. And then, from the angle, and so their opponent is their shadow. And as soon as this hand goes out, they counter with that, but as soon as that hand counters, they counter, because it's a replay of the image of themselves. So they're quickening their reflexes to get as fast as themselves, or perhaps faster. So you see the shadow boxing thing, it's like fighting with your silhouette. So he says, this is what it's like when you cultivate like this. You're like shadow boxing an imaginary enemy. Or, and this one we really like child throwing shadows on the wall. Now, do you all know that one? I wish, well, if somebody would hang over by the clock there and put their hand up, what you can do is you can do this. Yeah, there you go. That's the bird flying. I've seen very complicated ones, Princess Meets a Frog kind of stuff. But I used to be able to do rabbit. That's rabbit. But you put your hand in front of the light, the shadow goes on the wall, and you create all this incredible stuff. You can actually have, and there's some forms of theater that use this, the silhouette images that are held by, where did I see this? It was in Indonesia or India someplace. Indonesia, yeah. And it's really they have puppets and the shadows then are the figures that move back and forth. And when you watch it long enough, you really get caught up in it. Nothing else is real except that. And of course, then the lights come on, the show's over, you go, so like a shadow thrown on the wall, he's saying, this is what you're doing. You're taking all these states that come, these phantoms of consciousness, and you're just spinning around in circles. It's meaningless. If they persist in this, they'll whip themselves into a state of frenzy. You'll get just totally caught up chasing these states. I want this one, I don't want that. Oh, I like that, I wish it would come back, but it's not coming back. How can I get it again? How can I avoid this? Here it comes again, it's waiting for me. If I dare sit, I'll be afraid. If I don't sit at the right time, then you start getting superstitious. If I sit at the right time, in the right space, on the right pillow, with the right incense, oh, it's the wrong incense today. Or if I do this pace with my beads, people start getting really crazy in this way, thinking like pitchers in the baseball league. You ever watch pitchers? Athletes tend to be very Michian superstitious. So if a pitcher throws a really good ball, and he thought, when I threw that ball, I had my hat on this way, and before I did a tug of my ear. So after that, you watch pitchers, they're doing all this stuff. They're trying to replicate the mojo of that superstitious act. And so people can get into their meditation like that and think, it's because the pillow I usually sit on was taken by somebody else. Or, I didn't bring my special beads, or I forgot to recite my mantra, and so on and so forth. So he says this is what happens. We have a quote here also interesting from the Shurangama Sutra. It's like a puppeteer who plays with shadows and works the dolls to seem as real as people. Although one sees them moving about freely, they're really governed by a set of strings. cease operating the controls and they return to stillness. The entire illusion is without a nature. Now, this is another parallel. So as we're putting together this text and we want to publish it, we're drawing on these references, these allusions from other texts to help reinforce it. I think it's going to be kind of interesting. Okay, so let's, in order to keep my promise, we have to...
Before you move on, Marty, this false thoughts, does that correspond to like alambana as we talked about before? Or there's another concept that corresponds better with misperception, vigyapti? I don't know if you are familiar with that, Yogacara.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, I don't know the Chinese, like an indication of what it would go back to?
The question here is we work across texts and work across languages. Some languages lend themselves to very detailed breakdowns of the psychological processes.
Yeah.
And some don't and are more generalized. So, for example, in the Chinese, everything is made from mind alone, xin. But that's used interchangeably in Chinese with shi, meaning consciousness. So, right. So, what I'm saying is the early translators in China had to wrestle with. They didn't have a detailed sort of psycho-spiritual realm corresponding to the investigation of the mind that was available, say, coming out of the Indian tradition. And so they did their best to find what were equivalents. And sometimes the equivalents weren't as subtle or sophisticated. And so there was a difficulty or challenge translating. When they went from just equivalents to idiomatic equivalents, in other words, what was the idiom expression, sometimes through analogies and metaphors they could get a little closer at working out some of that subtlety. But it's really never been a satisfactory one-to-one translation of that. So sometimes you'll find in the Sanskrit a list of 10 different ways of looking at a phenomena that gets covered by one or two characters in the Chinese. And so the way this is made up for is through practice. So through the actual art of practicing and investigating the mind, they actually go back and indeed find the realms that are being talked about in the text, but they didn't have words for in the beginning. So over time, with the translation to China, the language got more and more sophisticated. So when you get to what we call the consciousness-only school, you're getting a much more sophisticated use of language. But this took centuries. And of course, we're not even opening the can of worms here like America and English, that should be able to get at it. I would say everything's made from the mind alone. People have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah, you have no idea what the mind is. We think of Freud or Jung or somebody like that, and even there, or we think of it as neuroscience. We think it as some, like Neuron Central. Here it is, the Central Clearinghouse, Grand Central Station of the... And then consciousness is materialistic, and so the whole thing is done in that mode. So, we have some benefit with the English language, and then on the other hand, our worldviews and our very ideologies, in a sense, distort, actually, rather than lend clarity to this. So we all have to be patient here. You sort of get the drift of what's being discussed here, but the actual detailed language used, so Wang Xiang, could be rendered, and what we end up doing is we end up putting down a list of possible different translations. Depending on context, it's used differently. On one hand, you'd say you're completely deluded, or you could say you're inaccurate. It's not accurate. Or you could say you are actually thinking of things false. You're actually thinking of things that are unreal. There's a number of ways you can do it, or you can use it almost in a descriptive way of saying, there goes my mind again, running around like a monkey. It's, chasing its tail. It's false thinking. It's scattered. But here it doesn't just mean scattered. It can mean you can be very focused in using this mind, but because the lens is still not a good lens, no matter how you focus it, you're always going to see something other than what's there, because the lens itself, even though it's focused, has lost the field. And so it doesn't have any context anymore. Or it's a colored lens. So it's, I mean, what do we say? See the life through rose-colored glasses. So you can, have on your rose-colored tinted glasses, and it's fine, but everybody looks a different shade, right? So to say not focused or scattered, in fact, what he's talking about here is intense concentration. They're intensely concentrated, but the way in which they are looking and the lens they are looking through is a distorted lens, so no matter how much. And in fact, it gets worse when they concentrate harder. Because the more effort they apply with this distorted lens, the weirder it gets. This is really interesting.
So are you saying that all those things you mentioned can be hinted or referred to by that compound or Wang Shan? So all the stuff that you have, whether either is discourse, really distracted thinking, or thinking intensity or something, but it actually is ephemeral or deluded thinking. All those things can be
Not only can be, but I would say must be. So when the Chinese use the expression Wang Shan, they're covering a multitude of psychophysical phenomena, both the nature of reality as we perceive it, but also the nature of the way we use our consciousness. With certain emotions, things appear to be differently. This is false thinking. I love you, I hate you, is a false thinking because I am projecting through that lens of emotion onto you an object of something. And so it implies all of that. That's why the more text you read, the more context you see, the more you can be nimble in saying, well, here it means this, here it means this, here it means this. When I first came in, coming from a Catholic background, when my teacher says, you're just false thinking, I went, oh, mea culpa, I'm sorry. My mind is sinful. My mind has entered the sinful wrong, the sinful state. And he would like, what? No, and he just, you don't get it. And then in another context, he'd say, oh, you're false thinking. And in another context, he'd say, you're false. And all three contexts were different. And finally, I went, 1, 2, 3. This must mean something other than what I thought it meant. And one time he would use it to say, when you're sitting in meditation, you're just false thinking because you're chasing your thoughts. You think they're real. In another case, he would say, you're false thinking because you are not seeing things clearly at all as they are. In another case, he'd say you're false thinking because you're looking for the future for everything. Or you're false thinking because you're in the past. Or you're false thinking because you're trying to grab the present. So it was like, when you take all the context, you kind of get a feel, but the same expression, Wang Shan, was used in all cases. So this is the challenge, yes?
Is there any true thinking for the ordinary person, or is there only no thought for the awakened person?
Well, see, this is what it invites. This is exactly what false thinking invites. So we have dichotomies, right? There's false and there's true thinking. What I do is true thinking, and what you do is false thinking. It's that simple. And what I hold to is orthodoxy, and what you hold to is heresy. I mean, this is the way it breaks down. So, true mind, Junshin, is used to indicate thinking without thinking without projecting, thinking without expectation. It's reflective rather than projective. So yes, it's true, but it's not discursive. It's more like you are and so the true thinking would be called awakening, the awakened mind, and that's described as it is nowhere attached but everywhere aware and engaged. Whoa. That's what true means in this context, and it's not like, so here's my true thoughts. These are the good ones. This is on my list of Hallmark cards, true thoughts, and I will only think these. And the patriarchs would say that's false thinking too. Because it's a projection, it's based on wanting and needing and manipulating and so on and so forth. But true thinking, it says, right in thought, one is apart from thoughts. One thinks but retains no thinking. One thinks but there's no thinking going on. And it's expressed paradoxically like that. And it's expressed paradoxically like that because some people will say then, no thinking is true thinking. And then they tried to do a sort of self-imposed lobotomy and stop the thinking process. And again, Hui Neng and the other patriarch says, now you've gone from foolish to utterly foolish. You've actually, thinking by repressing thoughts and being a piece of wood, you will then have the no thought that we're talking about. And no thought is true thought, and true thought is seeing things as they truly are, without projection, without rejection, and so on and so forth. So, right.
The false part, the projection of, or the assignment of importance to your own projections and your...
Right, and it actually is this, it's actually assuming that as soon as you begin to do this, it's not only assigning importance to them, you've already set them up to be important. Because I don't think of things that are not important.
You've created them and they are important.
Right. So from the referential point of the self, once you construct that identity of the self, then all activities are justified. You don't have to justify them afterwards, they're already justified. So the questioning that's getting at here is the ordinary self that does all of this, that sets up these realities and constructions. When you're meditating, what you're trying to do is to not feed it so much. Reducing is really pretty strong, but you're just trying to momentarily stop that activity. And in that stopping, for moments, you can see the true working. But as soon as that happens and you try to grab that true and write it down into here's the true thought, then it becomes the false again, because it's me wanting that to hold on, to reproduce, and so on and so forth. So when it says there's not one thing, it doesn't mean there's nothing at all, but there's nothing that you can get at and hold on to that reifies that self. Which, that's what students say, I have a hard time wrapping my mind around that. So I don't have an answer. I say, yeah, it is. It's pretty hard to wrap the mind, especially the mind that is the mind of the self. So our mind is set up as our best lawyer. We have a mind, and it's our defense attorney that we have on retention 24/7. And anything that comes up, our lawyer is there for us. That's yours, that's not yours. Reject that, accept that. This is about you, this is not about you. We filter all the time like this. So stopping that mad voice, stopping that filtering process is partly what meditation is meant to give glimpses of. It can't completely deliver, but it's like a mnemonic device that helps us remember what that mad mind stopping is. So I often go the other way. I say, okay, I know you can't wrap your mind around that, and neither can I. But is it easier to wrap your mind around the self? Why don't you wrap your mind about there is something to get? Let's change the line here and say, basically, there's lots to get. The only problem is life's too short, you can't get it all. But if you're really frantic and scramble, you can get a lot. And then they start to go to the edge of the board like, yeah, and they go, whoa, wait a minute, this is a setup. They sense it, because now you're going back to, what is it that you can get then? Let's look at that carefully. And when you look at that, we say, basically, there's not one thing, I can't wrap my mind. Well, how about what you think you're going to get? And this goes back to what's called me and what belongs to me. So the me then says there's things that belong to me that I get. And then you start looking at it, well, where is that? So the poem I was going to use tonight came from a talk when I was with my teacher. We were traveling in Europe. And he said, the whole problem in the world, every place, is this delusional thing about the self. And once that self is established, everything flows from that. All the wars, all the strife, all the conflict, all the suffering, internal and external, comes from. And he said, and yet we never stop to pause and say, what is the self and where is it? So then he goes through, at that talk, he went through and he says, so that's you, that's the self, right? He said, but you feed it well, you give it really good medicine, you work out. And what does it do? It goes flabby. It gets fat, it gets infections, it gets diseases. The lovely hair and the exquisite shampoo you leave, the hair still turns white and falls out. The best dental, blah, 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 the teeth still go. You work out, you work out, you work out, and the muscles still start to turn to tofu. I'm talking soft tofu, I'm not talking about firm tofu. Okay? So he says, he said, well, you put an investment in all this, and yet when it gets closer and closer, you can see it slipping away. So he says, let's not talk about what you're getting, but the very thing that's the getting device. you can't get. And he said, now, I know you don't want to hear this, but I cannot not say this because it's absolutely what's going on. And the delusion that we have that there's there and that they're getting, he says, drives all the karma in the world, is driven by that. Whether it's me or my family or my country is going to, this kind of stuff. And they said, well, then you think, well, maybe it's not this body. I'm clear about that. It's my mind. My mind. After the body, my mind. Well, he said, where is that? That's even more elusive than your body. Thought after thought after thought, like waves on the ocean, you can't retain them, you can't get at them. I was thinking of that tonight. When I was growing up, my grandmother was raised on a farm, and she was smart. She was Irish and she was smart. I know some might think that's an oxymoron, but it's true. She was smart, and so she was the first woman in the state that went to a college, a local college, and she became a school teacher. So at one point she told me, don't break your body on the farm like my brothers and uncles did. It's really hard work, it's brutal work. Cultivate your mind, get an education, because that can't be taken away from you. And so, I went to school and everything, and I thought, yeah, it can. If my grandmother, I'd say, Grandma, that can be taken away too. I think of the line from Zhuangzi. Zhuangzi has this wonderful line. He said, the books and the knowledge and the facts of the world are infinite. And not only what's existing is infinite, all the new stuff that's coming out is even more expansive. He said, yet, the mind, what you use to pursue it, is finite. So he says, using the finite to go after the infinite, this is kind of foolish, isn't it? Now, I don't mean to dissuade any of you from going to school or finishing your degrees, but in this lesson, it's saying even the things that we think are solid, that our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions, these too are subject to decay and passing. From moment to moment, from day to day, from year to year. And as we get older, even the memories and dreams and reflections that we constitute our very identity start to evaporate. One of the curses of modern life is living long. My people on the farm didn't have to deal with what we call neural degeneration or something like Alzheimer's because they all died in their 60s, or that was like a ripe old age. Now, though, your body goes on, but your memories, dreams, reflections, that which makes up your identity that they can't take away from you, actually can be taken away from you, so there's nothing there anymore. Even you think, well, I've kept it in my pictures in my photo album, which is the illusion about cameras is we caught it. We've frozen that wonderful moment, so we'll never forget it. But I can remember with my uncle who had Alzheimer's, I'd bring out the photo album, and he was like, what's that? Who's that? Nothing was registering. So when it says there's not one thing that you can get, it's actually hitting at the profundity of that reality, but not in a nihilistic way at all. It's just that's the cold dose to sort of wake one up. But let me give you the poem that he did at that time, if we could call that up, because I like the poem. I don't know the Chinese, so those of you who can you find that poem I sent you? I sent it to you and Alan. Did you get an email? And this was a poem that Master Hua used at that time to talk about this phenomena, what the sixth patriarch says, a frantic passage through life. Running, gathering, accumulating, thinking that we're getting something. There we go. Now this is a rough translation, but I remember this poem. So it says, fish leap about in the water. People either clamor or muck about in the world. So you have a parallel here. And it's not a flattering parallel per se. If you think about how fish swim about and muck about in the water. I went over to a friend's house who's got a pond with koi and other fish. and they just back and forth all day. A crane comes down, they go "Hoom," except one who's like, "Hey, what's that?" And it's gone. And you take a little food and you put your hand out and whoosh, they all come and they fight and they kick their tails to get that food, and they take the food and they go and poop, and gradually, so fish leap about in the water, people clamber about at Wall Street. I mean in the world. And then the next line, they don't know enough, they're not enough aware, they don't have enough consciousness to do good deeds, to do good things, virtuous deeds. But instead create bad karma, and here the word is callously, and it could mean callously with malice, but it can also mean callously with no sensibility of I'm doing it. Both are implied there. So those are the first line. People fish leap in the water, people clamoring through the world. While they have that brief interval between birth and death, they really don't know how important it is to do good deeds, because that's the only driving mechanism in our destiny. Is karma, and actually it's very straight. It's either wholesome or unwholesome. That's all you're held to. You can have a lousy dissertation, you can defend an idea, you can say I believe in totalitarianism or I believe in anarchy. You're not going to be held to that. But you will be held to this in the karmic sense. Now he says, you may pile up gold and silver high as a mountain. That's the next line. And all you have to do here is substitute gold and silver for whatever it is that you're piling up. Silverware, shoes, utensils, credit cards, clothes. What?
Mercedes.
Mercedes.
Accolades.
Accolades. Pile up accolades as high as a mountain. That's good. What else? Books. Pile up books. No, they're exception. Good books are an exception. That's called a library. Other people pile up junk, but I pile up a library. Okay, yeah, you just add, put it in there. But now the line says, but when you close your eyes, it's all gone. And sometimes before you close your eyes, it's all gone. Your eyes in those last minutes can be open, but they're all gone as far as your heart's concerned because there's no desire for them anymore. The desire has gone. So even at the point that happens, but when you do close your eyes, it's all gone. So whatever you piled up, it's gone. Empty-handed you go to see King Yama. Now, King Yama is not referring to a mundane ruler. This is referring to the Lord of the underworld, the realm where you pass through from this life, through dying, then through that place where things get measured out, weighed, blah, 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 and then you come back accordingly on your gold and silver. So if you hide it, and you can remember where you hid it, you can come back and get it. No, sorry. What you come back to is the last two lines of the first verse. You're virtuous or you're unwholesome. That is the only carryover of investment that comes back. So he says, empty-handed, you face King Yama, and regretfully, you let your tears cascade. In other words, at that point, what the sixth patriarch says, you realize this frantic passage in life, but now he says the bitter regret is that you've wasted it. So the verse, he gave this verse in Europe when we were traveling as a kind of a way of reinforcing all he'd been talking about before about the self, investing in the self. He says, busy, 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 accumulating money, accumulating accolades and wealth and fame and name. Busy, busy, we do this all day long. And he said, and yet as we're doing it, we are burning out. Just as sure as an incense stick once lit keeps burning down. The fragrance is there and all of a sudden it's out. And in the end, all that accumulation, there's nothing. Absolutely nothing. And the bitter regret is, what did I do? But we weren't able to wake up. And he said, even though we know that this is the case, the habit energy is so strong that, and his statement then at that time was, not only we do this, we do it life after life after life. He said, we come back, we repeat this process, fish in the water, people in the world, we muck about, and we do it again. And he said, this is samsara, this is how it works. And it's happening not just life to life, from thought to thought, moment to moment. So this I wanted to share a little bit tonight because it's it's getting at this idea there's not one thing, basically no one thing. The one side of this means there isn't anything that you can accumulate and pile. But on the other side of this, realizing there's not one thing is actually then the letting go of everything that's false. And the letting go of everything that's false paradoxically opens to what's called miaoshan, wondrous existence. So the wondrous functioning is now unimpeded by grabbing or grasping after anything, and it's not like nothing. It's actually the full functioning of human nature. And this is the paradox. But as the text is saying, as my teacher used to say, you cannot experience that unless you let go of this. Unless you let go of something that's false, even a little bit, you won't get even the beginning flavor of that. But the more you can see through and put down, the more this naturally comes forth and manifests. It's a trade-off. But the idea that you can have both is not going to work. Moreover, that your accumulation will now lead to the meditation hall where you will get awakening and nirvana and all the bliss of dhyana and so on and so forth. And immortality is, in fact, not letting go of the false. It's reifying, it's reinforcing it. And now you're just doing spiritual mucking about in the spiritual world. So that's why the text is, and I didn't get to the next passage, so next week I'm going to have to frantically read the sutras. And then some people will have bitter regret and some people are very happy we finally finished in due time. But that'll do it for, I think, tonight. We'll come back to more of this next week. It's interesting, good stuff. And Han Shan's... That'll be a new definition of dukkha. For you guys.
You're projecting, you don't know that.
There we go. And this is amazing, I still have 10% power left. Wow. Well, that's because you came in and you made it so dim, I'm squinting my eyes. By reducing the light, there's more. I wonder if there's a parallel. By reducing the light that goes out, you actually increase your power. This is about non-outflow. Okay. See, I told you.
It's light, which in some systems it's referred to as energy light.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah, this is another discussion too. When they say return the light, illumine within, some people take that as metaphor.
No.
But actually, at certain stages of your cultivation, you realize that this is actually true. And so really good teachers, actually, when you go to a doctor, I'm thinking of the Chinese system of doctoring. The Western medicines use a bunch of devices, x-rays and scans and whatnot. But when you go to a Chinese doctor, they look at how you walk, they look how you stand, they look at skin, they pick up the smell of your, and they listen to your voice and everything, and they can actually sort of just see your state of health through all of those things. When you come to an Ashan Jersher, a Kalyana Mitra, who has this ability, when you come in, they can actually see exactly how much light you have or don't, and where you're losing it and where you're not. And they can actually do triage right in the spot.
Well, what is it that they see?
If I told you I didn't know, I'd be lying. And if I told you I did, you wouldn't believe me. So there. But what they do is when they do triage, what they do is not saying, oh, you're losing your light. They say, if you don't stop losing your temper, you're going to be in deep doo-doo. Oh, I don't have a temper. No, you have a... I don't have a temper. Oh, okay. Or they'll actually go to where you're bleeding, whether it's arrogance or anger or unlimited lust, and they say, if you don't stop seeking, you're going to drain away your whole life force. And often people have moments of tears at that moment because they actually hear the kindness behind that instruction that nobody would tell them. So this is all very interesting. Anyhow, enough for tonight. Any announcements?
Monday is Buddha's birthday and celebrating the celebration, and it's going to begin at 8 a.m. 9 a.m.
This Sunday is the celebration of the Buddha's birthday, so there will be something here?
At City of 10,000 Buddhas.
Right. Is there anything happening here?
As far as we know.
Yeah, I was thinking of Winnie the Pooh when Eeyore didn't have a birthday party and nobody came. So we're going to have an Eeyore Day here. And the city will have the birthday party, but the Buddha in Berkeley go, nobody remembered, nobody cares. Kind of a weak balloon in the corner. Stale cake that went up to the city. Are you having a Bathing the Buddha birthday party here?
Now we are.
See? Okay. There's no Buddha in Berkeley.
An awakening?
What's that?
What is that? Time after awakening? Is there even a concept of time to awaken? The Buddha mind, would there be time?
Sure. But again,
Way.
time is considered to be one of, we get into the text, it's one of the defiling
Yeah.
concepts. But so is this world, and so is the human body. All of these things are, but it's how you use time, how you understand time.
Okay.
For example, Buddha's bodhisattvas, let's just say these types of beings, they are complete masters over their time because they make vows. Their vows then continue along a trajectory of time and space, but it's no longer they're being held by the constrictions of time with the sense of the beginning and end, but rather they're liberated. So it's not that time ceases to function, but it ceases to have the constricting element to it. And when it says, it doesn't say there's no time, it says all time is one time. And one time is all time. So their mind is that there is still time, and one place is every place, and this every place is one place. That is the awakened mind. So it's not like it ceases, but it ceases to have that kind of constricting hold over consciousness. It's a very different, because they work in time.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't punch in, in that sense, but they're working in time because for people, time is karma. There is the only time that is our karma going on, and so which is illusory, but while you're in it, it's still holding. That's the irony of it. So they have to work within that, but they don't keep track of time because the vow is what's driving their sense of time. And they make vows that in a sense are, quote, timeless. Now, as soon as I do that, somebody says, I can't wrap my mind around that either. I know. Timelessness, I can't wrap my mind around, but try to wrap it around time. That's just difficult. So don't stay awake tonight over all this. Just have a good sleep.
One more announcement.
Okay.
So, the Oregon Blue Farm Tree website is up. You can register now. For those people who don't know this retreat, every summer, the Berkeley Monastery community go to Oregon for 1 week of camping in the woods and meditation retreat. Very easygoing. We have a lot of
This is not bitter practice.
but you do have to be comfortable in nature and using outdoor showers and outdoor toilets, things like that. This year, can you look at the very top? Verhoeven will speak on the 6 principles, Buddha Dharma and Western values and exploration of 6 guidelines. It will be the week before the Guanyin session during the summer, July 6th, July 12th.
Now, you should say that it's limited, right? In terms of space and everything, so...
We capped it at 70 people, 70 to 80 people, so sign up.
And it gets filled up quickly. A lot of people like to go, and so what is it? First come, first served, or your stage of awakening? I mean, I've never gone. Let's do the transference.
May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving you while in respect to the three jewels.